Well, today is Sunday. This is August 15th.
2021.
We're going to do some talks today or discussion about our travels after, starting in about, what was it you said, 2004?
2003. We took a lot of family vacations. We talked about that, family vacations, but travel that we did as a couple and visiting kids, that was fun. I was trying to review, we went down to, we lived in El Paso when we went to Priscilla and Eric's wedding in the Mesa Temple, then back to El Paso for the reception. That was 1993. Then Nathan and Melanie got married in 1996. By that time we were living in St. George. And then we had lots of adventures after that.
Well, we had Jacob and Molly getting married.
Jacob and Molly got married down in Arizona and took the whole family for that. But I'm thinking of the year of our grand adventure 1993, when Mike got married. So Mike and Rebecca were getting married in the Washington, D.C. temple, but her home was Pittsburgh. And so 2003, okay, 2003 was Johnny and Shelby. They both lived, her family was from Bountiful, we were from Bountiful. They got married, so that was just kind of a stay-at-home thing. But 2004 was Mike and Rebecca. But before we went to their wedding...
2003 was also Brian and Brandy.
Brian and Brandy. They also lived at home, so we didn't have to travel. So we had 4 kids married at sea. It's Priscilla first, Nathan and Melanie, Jake and Molly, Johnny and Shelby, Brian and Brandy. 5 of the 7 kids were married. And then it was 2004. And that's the year we're going to start talking about our grand adventures, because we're going, just the 2 of us. So the first thing we did in 2004 was in the spring, or early, maybe, I can't remember what time of year it was.
Around Easter time.
Okay. We went to Monterey, California. Why?
Well, Nathan was there, and Melanie were there attending a language school at the Defense Language Institute to learn Spanish before they went to Spain.
And so we went to Monterey. How fun is that?
We had to walk along the wharfs and drive over to Carmel and, amongst all the shops that they had over there. So we had I don't know how long we spent, if it was 3 or 4 days or 5 days with them.
And then we got home back to Bountiful, and we were on our way to go to Pittsburgh to meet up with Johnny and with Mike and Rebecca. Now, Johnny and Shelby were married the previous year. They were students at BYU, but this was spring break for them. So they came with us. It was like a caravan. Mom and Dad, Johnny and Shelby. How fun is that?
Yeah, we were the only car in that caravan.
Yeah. So what we decided to do...
I was driving, or Johnny would be driving, and 1 or 2 of us would be in the back seat having time spent knitting hats all the time.
We went along... We probably got to Pittsburgh in... Day and a half to get to Pittsburgh. And then we went down to the Washington, D.C. temple for the wedding, came back to Pittsburgh for a May Day wedding reception. But then this was our big plan. We decided, as long as we're going that far, let's make a big trip out of it. So we decided to do a church history trip on our return.
So we visited such places as Palmyra, New York, Joseph Smith's home there, and Sacred Grove. We did not stay for the Book of Mormon, what's it called?
The store?
No, not the store, but...
Printing press, E.B. Grandin Printing Press?
We went to that, but we didn't go. We didn't wait around for the Hill Cumorah path.
Oh yeah, that's in August. So this was in May, and it was actually the very beginning of the opening of the church history sites, because it's cold back there, lots of snow. But before we went, my sister Margie, she had been a seminary teacher, and so she told us, you need to get that green book, the church history and the dispensation of times. So we got that green book and we read it as we went. It was so interesting because, you're in the car driving. And so it was easy for Johnny or Shelby or me to switch off while John was driving, reading about the area we were about to visit. So it was like having a guided tour.
Yeah, and so after we went to Palmyra, then we went down the river and over to Buffalo, New York. So they could remember seeing the Niagara Falls. And then from there we went over to the Kirtland, Ohio area. So we went to Kirtland and saw the church history sites there in Kirtland.
Did we go to the Johnson farm? Yes.
Did we go down there?
I think we went to the Johnson farm.
I know we'd been there before, but...
Maybe we didn't do it this time. But it was very interesting, truly educational for us all, and interesting to be driving along and listening to the stories about where we're going to be visiting. We stayed in some interesting hotels.
Yeah. The most interesting place we stayed at was a little place called Blossom's Inn, or Blossom's Motel. Mom was really kind of famous for her trying to find a deal.
This is back when we did things on Priceline, and I can't remember. It was like $16 or $24 a night. I can't remember how much it was, but it was definitely worth just about that much money.
I thought we overcharged, I thought. Anyway, it was one of those really dungy places, and you thought when you turned the light on real fast, you heard the feet of all the cockroaches or something flying around down there. But anyways, that was one of the more memorable places. We, after Kirtland area, then we wandered over to Nauvoo.
Nauvoo was so wonderful. It was early in the season. Some of the missionaries had just barely arrived. We talked to a man who was riding the oxen.
Teamster driver.
The teamster. So now you can't just say, I want to go on a mission to Nauvoo, I want to drive oxen. You have to know how to do it. So he was experienced in this. I think from being a farmer, he knew how to drive oxen. And he had been there the year before. And then they called him back, says, we need you. We can't find another teamster. So he came out. I remember him sharing that story.
Yeah, we'd been to Nauvoo several times before this. But it came at a point where we wanted to spend 3 days. We said, if you go to Nauvoo, you just got to spend more than just an overnight trip down there. You got to spend 3 days. So we spent 3 days there this time.
Johnny and Shelby had been there previously as students at BYU. They played in a bluegrass band. And both of them were able to go, or maybe it was just Shelby.
Just Shelby.
Just Shelby went to perform there at Nauvoo for a couple of weeks, it seems like, with her group. Maybe it was only 1 week, but she had been there before, so it was very fun. I remember it was so nice to be in the period because you could see the actors who were in the pageants at night. They were in the shops during the day. They were out even dressed as Nauvoo townspeople. They would be, out about during the day. Sometimes if you were in an area, well, especially if we went to get ready for the pageant, they would be there. The people who were performing would be there showing you how to play the games that the kids played, or showing you the crafts that they did. It was very interesting because, you have to get ready for a pageant an hour to an hour and a half before it starts. And so it was nice to be able to have the people who were dressed as actors, they were going to be in the play, that were helping us to enjoy our experience, the experience of being a citizen of Nauvoo.
Yeah, they would go down amongst the crowd who was waiting for the play to start. Now, after that, we started getting...
Just a minute. We also went down to, from Nauvoo, we went down to, what is the place down the river? Where Carthage Jail. Okay, Carthage, Illinois. We went down there to see the jail, and that was very interesting also. To actually see the place where there was a dungeon that the prophet was in.
That was far west.
Far West, Missouri?
Liberty Jail.
Okay, never mind. But we
saw the jail where Joseph was shot at and martyred. And then from there we headed on.
This is not chronological because this place was close to Nauvoo, but the Far West where we saw that he was in Liberty Jail, that was a different location.
That was over by Kansas City in Independence, Missouri.
So on our trip home, we were not going chronologically, but at least we got to see these places.
We had stopped at that trip. We stopped over there at Omaha, Nebraska, at the winter quarters site. And there we met a young lady who was from Russia.
A missionary from Russia. Now, what a small world this is.
Go ahead.
So we asked her, we know somebody who was a missionary in Russia. You're a missionary in the United States, winter quarters, but you're from Russia, and it's a big country. But do you know this person? It was Molly's
brother.
Molly's brother had been a missionary there. And then later on, he went back on some kind of an education program where he and his wife were living there. And she said, oh, yes, I knew him. He was the branch president.
Yeah.
What a small world.
Yeah, it was funny. And then after that, we headed home. We pretty well threw the foot into the throttle and just
We drove right past the turnoff to Jackson Hole. Well, what's it called?
Martin's Cove.
Martin's Cove. Martin's Cove. We were just too tired by then to take one more trip off the trail, so we headed straight home. But we were gone about, how long do you think it was? 10 days?
Nearly, probably 10 days, maybe 2 weeks.
Grand adventure.
That got us into shape for the future, where we would take off. We've made a couple of trips to Oregon, up to Seaside, Oregon. Walked in the beach, stayed at a bed and breakfast there on the end of the promenade.
One time, that time we went to Seaside, Oregon, we parked our car at the bed and breakfast, and for a week we never started the car. Because everything we wanted to do, we could walk along the beach. We could walk to eat, we could walk to get groceries. It was just a lot of fun. It was a great, great experience living on the beach. Of course, he had all those memories of living there as a boy.
We stayed just about 2 blocks or 3 from where we lived in Seaside, Oregon. So that was a real treat for me. And we've been back a couple of times, like I said, since then even, to stay at, because Worldmark has a resort there. So after that, we've journeyed up to Seattle and visited Mike and Beck up there at their apartment.
We went there when they only had one child.
We went there when they had none.
Yeah, okay, they had 0 kids. And we went there when Hart was...
Art was born.
Uh-huh. They also think we made a trip up there when Brooks was born. Mm-hmm. Then we've also been to... I'm trying to think of places... Of course, we've been to see Nathan and Melanie in... We've seen them in...
Both in Georgia.
Okay, but first of all, we saw them at Luke Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And then we saw them at Valdosta. And that was before we saw them in New Mexico, because I think they were at Valdosta before they went to New Mexico.
Yeah.
We stayed with them in New Mexico.
Of course, we went to visit them when they were in Spain.
That's when Rowan had her first birthday. Yeah. That was a grand adventure. The first time we needed a passport, right?
Well, it was the first time we traveled internationally like that.
Right.
Otherwise, that's about the only international trip, other than we did go into Canada at Niagara Falls.
We've been to Mexico, but
We've been
those
to
aren't
Mexico.
international. They don't seem international.
Well, they just don't seem very far because we go back and forth to work.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyway, we used to visit with Johnny and Shelby down at Edwards Air Force Base, there in the desert of the Mojave, just south of the Mojave Desert.
And that was 2013. So let me tell you, first of all, in the fall of 2012, we thought we were going to have to move to Arizona to help my mom. To help Julianne, who's living with my mom, and to help her take care of her because, Mom was getting older and Julianne needed a lot of help. She kind of was bedridden by then. And so we took this trip in the fall because we thought we were going to have to go to Arizona. And we went to visit everybody who was in the east.
Wherever they were.
We were gone for about 6 weeks. And we loved it. We took our van, the Batmobile. Wasn't a van.
Yeah.
What was it called?
It was
Aerostar?
a Lincoln, not Aerostar.
Anyway, Lincoln Navigate, whatever.
Anyway, we traveled in that. Now we started going in that year. We every time we'd stop on a Sunday, we would go to church. So we got pretty good acquainted with lots of units of the church across the country. And we used to kind of give them ratings. No, not for good or bad, but just for outstanding musicianship or choirs. Like the Branson Second Ward, Branson, Missouri. They sang just like, they were all performers on the stages of Branson. So
we were a little bit late getting into church. We got there in the middle of the first opening song, and it was just so fantastic. We picked up a program which had an insert in it, and the insert said, Instant Ward Choir. Anybody who's here is welcome to come up and sing in the Instant Ward Choir.
Yeah. When they got up there to sing,
there was so many that got up we didn't go because like half the congregation was up and singing in the
we had more
choir.
than 70 people up there in the choir loft. So anyway, I turned to Kathy and she had commented about something. And I said, well, I'm sitting next to Johnny Cash in church. And of course they have people who perform there who are lookalikes. So
they sing the songs of the artist and they try to look like the artist.
So this guy was dressed up and all done up like Johnny Cash was at church next to me.
And it looked like Burl Ives was playing the organ.
Yeah. So those are kind of things we got to see. Now we went to big wards, we went to small branches, more like twigs along the way. And one such place was at Big Sky, Montana. Eric and Priscilla came up for the weekend with us there, and we went to church. We about, well, I shouldn't say doubled maybe, but we made a significant impact with our two families there.
Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Jared came with us. There's 5 of us. There was another family there that you could tell they were visitors, and they had a couple of kids. But after sacrament was over, let me tell you what happened the day before. So we were staying at a place, a condo, or like a resort, and we had to go get our groceries. So we went to the grocery store, and as I was going around in the produce section, a guy came up to me and said, "Hey, I like your shirt." Or maybe it's John.
I had my BYU shirt.
John was wearing his BYU shirt. And he said, yeah, the lady at the cash register, her husband is working on his PhD there at that school.
And so we talked to the lady at the register, and she was the Relief Society president. When we got there on Sunday, she was also
Let me tell you
organist.
first, we asked her, what time is church? She said, well, and where is the church? Because we could find it. She says, well, If you go down this way and this way, you see all these big houses. The little place next to it, that's the church. It was like two double wide trailers. That was the chapel next to these twice as tall houses. She said, we call that our Polly Pocket Chapel.
Yeah. And so anyway, that branch had only 19 members of record on their rolls, and I think they were technically attached to like the Butte or something like that.
Another ward was in charge of providing leadership.
Yeah.
But that's the first ward I've been to where they have a guest register. When you first walk in, there's a guest register on the first table to say, please leave your name and tell us where you're from. So that was
she says they
interesting.
fill up that building during the summertime and during the ski season up there in that area. She says they'll just fill that building up.
The time we were there was not as busy. I think probably we got a better rate because it was off season in Big Sky, Montana. There were no conventions going on and no skiing going on. So our rental was less expensive, but it was fun.
Yes, it was.
Let me just tell you one thing. This is my first introduction to a 2-hour meeting schedule. She had told us, the Relief Society president, cashier at the store, had told us it only lasts 2 hours. And so 1 week we'll have sacrament meeting and Sunday school, and the next week we'll have sacrament meeting and primary and those other programs. So we happened to be there on the week that it was sacrament meeting and primary.
And so one of the primary president, or the person who was the primary president anyway at that time, came up and talked to Priscilla or Jared, asked him if he's going to stay for primary. Said yes. And
the other family with kids left, so Jared was the only one. So Jared had a teacher who taught him the primary lesson all by himself, and we went into Relief Society. And I remember how spiritual, what a great meeting it was, with probably 4 or 5 of us in that meeting.
Everybody else was on staff. So they didn't have many people to work with, but they'd get stuff done.
We did recognize the produce guy. He was a little bit, maybe Down syndrome, that's what it was, Down syndrome. And he was the only one who passed the sacrament. And the Relief Society president turned on the button for the organ to play, and then she was also the chorister.
Yeah. So you talk about wearing many hats. They were. Now, interesting places we've been other than that was, we went back one time and saw Martin's Cove. And we did that on the way to up to Mount Rushmore in South Dakota. And then we skirted along South Dakota and went to Dubuque, Iowa, on an opportunity to go back and see Sue and Roger Hanselman.
And John had been back there before on business trips, so that was the first time I had been back to Dubuque, where we went after Jacob was born. He was just a baby when we moved there.
And so we had a great time there. We got a chance to visit with many, many old acquaintances.
And when we went to church, we were like legendary because Roger and Sue were so much a part of the branch and now the ward that everybody knew them, and because they knew about their story of conversion, they knew us. So we felt like we were back amongst friends.
Yeah, they kind of said, I heard people sitting behind us were saying something like, I think that must be the Hansens. That they're the ones that helped the Hanselman families.
It was interesting that time we were there with Roger and Sue. So they had some kids visiting. And so Rachel was there and Rich. And I think one of the twins, Dan or David, I can't remember which one. I don't think Fred was there, nor Karen. But it was interesting to hear them as adults now, married, and interesting to hear them talking about what they remember of their conversion experience, of the story of their being introduced to the church.
So yeah, we had a picnic that weekend up at Eagle Point Park, overlooking the docks, or the locks.
On the Mississippi River.
And that was just a very, very pretty day.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I'll tell you one thing I remember about the very first time we met them, when the missionaries came to our home to teach the Hanselman family. There were 6 of them there because the 7th, Karen was the oldest. She had a meeting at the high school. But during that first introduction to the missionaries, the kids, at that time I think Rachel and Rich were probably 10 or 11, they were so excited to meet these missionaries. And they got their Articles of Faith cards. And I think before the evening was out, or by the next day, a couple of those kids already had 13 Articles of Faith memorized. That was fantastic. And now here we were talking to Rachel, who is now married to her husband, and Karen had been a Relief Society president. And Rachel was now the Relief Society president, I think.
Yeah, they were in different areas of the country.
Right, different states. And Rachel's husband was the bishop. So it's nice to see a little bit of neighborliness passed along to new generations. It was wonderful.
Yeah, it was. And now we've been friends with the Hanselmans since 1978.
Let's talk about some of our visits along the eastern coast. So we've been down to see, I was trying to think, we saw Johnny and Shelby when they were during this 2013 year, we saw them one time at Alabama.
Well, we saw him in, Johnny was getting ready to go to
Sergeant Major School.
AFIT.
Air Force Institute of Technology, but he had to get some kind of...
He had to get an officer training program attendance. So he went to that down in Alabama. So we went down to Alabama and visited him there. Of course, Johnny and Shelby would always put us up in
officers'
VOQ,
quarters, visiting officers' quarters.
And so we'd stay there, or at a family, what's that one called?
Temporary living facility.
Yeah, temporary living.
TLF.
I remember all these codes.
We stayed with that when we were with Nathan in New Mexico, too. So we visited with Nathan and Melanie in Sky Harbor. Well, no, not Sky Harbor, but the fort. What is the Air Force base out there?
Well, it's not a fort.
Luke Air Force Base.
Wrong, it's Holman.
No. We saw them first. We visited with them when we were in Arizona, and they were at Luke. We saw them there. Mm-hmm. And then we also saw them at Holloman in New Mexico.
We've also seen them at Valdosta.
Valdosta, Georgia. We went to Valdosta one time. This was earlier than 2003. Johnny and Shelby, Johnny was with us. I think maybe Mike was with us.
Well, Mike and Brian went with us.
Okay. But was Marie there? Did she go to Valdosta? We went down to Disneyland, Disney World.
No, we just had 2 kids with us.
Only 2. Okay. We've been lots of places.
That I can remember.
Okay.
Because we rented a Chevy Impala, so it wasn't big enough to hold many more than 5.
Okay. All right. So I remember we've seen Johnny and Shelby when they were living at a small place in Destin, and then they moved to the place by the beach in Destin. They were just with walking distance to the beach, like 100 yards, whatever. It was just a block away to walk down to the beach.
Yeah.
That was fun. And then we visited Nathan and Melanie in the Hansen Hacienda on Sunset Cove in Niceville, Florida. We stayed there with them more than once. We visited Mike and Rebecca when they lived in a small, tiny apartment. Okay, Washington, D.C. is very expensive. And so for them to be able to live in a house that I think it was 18 feet from the front porch to the side, it was a townhouse, okay? And I think that we measured that was all it was.
There are row houses in Washington.
Row houses, 3 levels. And so we stayed in the basement. We stayed upstairs one time. Another time we stayed in the basement. We went to watch TV in the basement. But anyway.
With the crickets?
With the crickets. It was very interesting. Their kitchen was so small to go outside, you had to go through their kitchen, and if the refrigerator door was open, you couldn't pass. If the dishwasher was open, you couldn't pass. Okay, that's how small it was. Little tiny cabinet on one side, and the bigger stove and kitchen, stove and fridge and all these things on the other side. And I'll tell you what, when I opened her refrigerator, packed to the gills, I thought, she has got to be blessed that all this food is here and nothing is, the stuff in the fridge isn't freezing, which would happen in a lot of my refrigerators.
Yeah, so she always got the prize when we go around about who could make the most space in a refrigerator.
Yeah.
Now our time is up for about today, but we ought to bring in that Brian and Brandy, in the midst of all this, they had gotten their first duty station after Brian had gone through basic training and his skills training, and that was over to Okinawa, Japan, which is where Heath and Hayden were born. I remember Brian calling me up on Sunday, I think it was, telling me that looked like Heath and Hayden were going to come now, and so they were
Very early. They weren't due until December, and this was October.
Yeah, and they came in at 2 pounds 7 ounces and 2 pounds 11 ounces.
They were born in Okinawa, and because of the neonatal ICU was not in Okinawa. They had an ICU, but they had to have a neonatal ICU for the babies that were that small. And so they flew them on a huge plane with the 2 isolettes.
Air Force transport plane.
To Hawaii. So then we got to go to Hawaii. The only time we've ever been there was to go visit with Nathan and Melanie, Brian and Brandy, and see those 2 little babies. They're wrapped up like baby burritos when they were just so small. They had to be fed every 3 hours, I think, or every 4 hours. But Brian and Brandy would both get up, go tend the babies, had to be changed, diapered, fed, and then put back to sleep. And then they go back to their place they were staying. What was it called?
Fisher House.
The Fisher House. It was like the Ronald McDonald House, but for the Air Force. And I remember them saying, they had people saying, "Why do your alarms keep going off in the middle of the night? So many times your alarms go off." Well, because we have to get up every 4 hours to go tend our babies.
And the nurses there were very in awe of Brian and Brandy being such a young couple, but also because of how dedicated they were to those 2 kids.
And now they're turning 16 this year.
I just noticed that you got a couple of comments on the stream from Johnny. It says, let's see, also stopped by Jake and Molly's place in Kirksville, and you visited us in Japan too, it says.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're going to have to have another edition of all this.
We're only thinking about 1 year, 2013. I guess, yeah, we did stop in Kirksville. We did stop in Kirksville. I remember how small it was. And Jake only had a bike to ride to school, and
he had a scooter eventually.
Uh-huh.
But the thing I remember about Johnny and Shelby and our trip to Tokyo to visit them is we were getting ready to get to the airport and take off and go home. And so we were out there trying to find somebody, or we were trying to find a question as to where we could get out and start to get the ticket and everything else for the bus. So Kathy bails out of the car and goes running around somewhere to try to find this ticket.
I was trying to ask a question for people who didn't understand what I was saying. Johnny and Shelby were taking us to the airport anyway.
Anyway, Shelby was like, "What is she doing? What is she doing?" And we didn't know if she was ever going to learn where to go back to pick her up again. But there was Mom. She was out there boldly trying to go, boldly going where no one else had gone before.
Where no man has gone before. Okay. Well, this is interesting. We have a lot more we could talk about. Great adventures, fun family times. We've seen Indigo growing up. We've seen Rocky and Meadow and all these kids, we've seen them from tiny ages up to their big ages. I remember when Rocky was born, we went down to visit, and I remember I probably held him for 3 or 4 hours one afternoon just because I could. And Molly was busy with lots of things, and it was just, you know, great, wonderful memories. We should write some of this stuff down.
We're making a recording right now.
Okay, here we are. Instead of writing it, we're recording it.
Any more questions?
Nope.
We'll try and maybe continue with this topic for our next episode too, because we haven't even begun to talk about places we've been.
Okay.
So until next time.
Sayonara.
All right.
Adios. Love y'all.
Happy trails to you.
Until we meet again. Happy
Happy
trails.
trails to you.
And keep smiling until then. That's about all we know.
All right.
And we're out.